divided world. All the focus was on the Russia-Ukraine war, the text of it. There is some criticism that it has been diluted somewhat, but at the end of the day, they managed to get a joint statement, something that even the negotiators did not know just a few hours before it finally got adopted. That was number one. Number two, this massive, mammoth economic corridor that links India through the Middle East all the way to Europe. That, well, you can characterize it as a direct challenge to the Belt and Road Initiative, but it stands on its own. It's backed by some of the biggest economies in the world, and it is in their interest to make sure that it is successful, with or without it being some kind of a challenge to the BRI. And the third and most important thing was the African Union getting a place at the G20 high table and thereby giving a voice to the global South. I sat down with one of the chief architects of this Delhi G20 success, External Affairs Minister Dr. S Jaishankar. So the Delhi G20 has been a success, a resounding one at that, by every yardstick that is imaginable. And one of the chief architects behind that success is now joining me, External Affairs Minister Dr. Jaishankar. Thank you very much. And many congratulations to you and your team.
Well, thank you very much
for what has been hard work over the last 1 year plus. What does it feel like scoring a test match 100?
Well, I don't know about that, but I think at one level, yes, there is a lot of satisfaction that what was a very high profile, very complex event logistically was pulled off. But I think more than that, it is also that at a very difficult time in the global political environment, we were able to actually get the 20 most important countries to actually reach a consensus on a crucial set of issues, which is very important, to set the directions of where the world's going to be going for the rest of the decade.
So, all the focus, of course, has been on the joint declaration, and 12 hours before the declaration was officially adopted, negotiators were still not sure whether they would arrive at it. So give us what was the inside story. How did it actually come through?
Well, I don't know about 12 hours. I can tell you it was much closer than that.
Much closer than 12 hours.
I mean, let me roll back here a bit. It was not that we thought a declaration wouldn't come out, but because I think somewhere all of us, certainly the team we had, Sherpa, myself, and I kept PM apprised from time to time what was happening. We had a sense eventually that we'll get there. But having said that, you have to get there.
Yes.
And what would happen is, it's like, oh, we have it nailed down, and then something else would happen, and then we'd say, no, somebody is bracketed. So it was never done till it's done, and that kept coming closer and closer and closer. So much so that even in the forenoon of that day,
on Saturday morning,
9th September, while session 1 was going on, we still had some issues to be nailed down. So this was obviously, you could say at one level, a source of concern or tension or whatever it is. But again, for those of us who've done a lot of these things before, this is how big international events go, that it really goes down to the wire, and you've got to hold your nerve, you've got to make that last push, and which is what we were doing even as people were arriving, even as between session 1 and session 2 we took a break. Even then we were still kind of
not over the line.
Well, we were trying to get everybody into confirming that they were comfortable with it. In some cases there were holds on certain issues. So it was a kind of a live action,
almost like a cricket match.
Yes, till the very end.
So you did mention in the press conference as well, the emerging bloc of countries, which is Indonesia, Brazil, South Africa, along with India, played a role in helping narrow down differences and finding a text that's acceptable to all. Can you elaborate on that role, and what may that mean, the coming together of this emerging bloc?
Well, there's some history to it. The history to it was that last year, Indonesia was the chair. The summit was in Bali, and the kind of pressures that we felt this time, Indonesia felt last time. And what we all did, at least, and I can say this particularly for ourselves, was that we really kind of batted for Indonesia very, very strongly. I remember last year even going to Moscow to meet the Russians to discuss this. Now, this time around, I think that feeling was strong among a certain group of countries, and I think particularly the four back-to-back chairs, Indonesia, us, Brazil, South Africa. But a few others as well,
sure, that
look, we all need to
come
together and persuade the others to find a reasonable middle ground. So at one level, this kind of diplomacy was going on, but bear in mind that finally it isn't just a textual fix. I mean, there were real political positions at stake here. So some of it therefore also depended very much on how did the countries feel about India. So the more we were able, I mean, if I were to broadly, let us say, classify them into three groups, those countries who are actively working with us,
yes,
so we had to enthuse them to work with us. Those countries who had strong entrenched positions, so we had to make them understand that, look, we respect your position, but surely it's important for you that the Indian presidency succeeds, and therefore to some extent it was influenced by the nature of their relationship with India. And then there were some who whose good wishes were with us, but who are waiting for things to move. Now, to some extent, this is really where PM came in very strongly, which was, by going to Indonesia, I mean, which the Indonesians appreciated enormously.
Okay.
That, for someone who's, for where the visitors are arriving on the 8th,
yeah,
to be in Indonesia on the 7th,
yeah,
and just to go there, just to do that. I think it not only enthused, motivated Indonesia very strongly. I think it sent a very strong message to the others as well, that look, here are all of us standing by each other and working together. It also gave him an opportunity to talk to some of the others. Some of the others he spoke there, some of the others he spoke here, and in certain specific cases, based on the feedback from the Sherpa team, I actually went to PM and said, sir, could you please have a word with, country X or country Y, and which he did. So that's really, I mean, that last, I would say, 12 hours, 12 to 24 hours, but especially on the 9th itself, a lot of that happened, by his also intervening with the absolutely crucial people, because there were one or two
holdouts.
Yeah.
So tell us about this, because there has been some criticism. Ukraine has said this on record, that they believe that the language on the Russia-Ukraine war has been diluted, that Russia has not been named directly. How would you respond to that criticism?
See, it's like this. As you know, the conflict started last February. We've already had one G20 meeting.
Yeah.
The G20 took a collective position out there. Now, the point is, we also all have to assess whether the purpose of a G20 gathering is to reiterate a position and make that like a some kind of immutable concept from which there should be no divergence, or whether we should update that issue and bring in further developments and also capture those as part of the concerns. So, you could say, for example, there's a $100 billion commitment which was made in Paris,
yes,
on climate change. So you could argue, well, every position therefore should only reiterate what it is and we should not be discussing anything else. But we don't do that. We keep evolving the climate action position as we go along. So in the year that has passed, the fact is that the Black Sea grain corridor has become a source of concern. It's non-functioning. The attacks on the infrastructure are a source of concern. The fact that there is a discussion going on in groups of countries in the world is also a development which needs to be noted. But most of all, the central concern which needed to be captured was the impact of all of this on the rest of the world.
The global south.
Now, if you are you're trying to, let's say we have this as a position. Now you want to also carry this and this. I mean, in any kind of international negotiation, that core is not going to remain exactly what it was, then they will say, fine, then go with that and let's not get anything else in. So, my own sense is, I would say very respectfully to all parties who may have concerns of the kind that you have expressed, that look, this is a evolving issue. It cannot be that on the one hand you say, oh, by the way, the entire world is concerned about it, but I will not express that concern in a statement. That the concern will only be a very narrow concern which will be a cut and paste from a previous year. So, if it is a truly global happening, which is why we are discussing it in the G20.
Correct.
Okay. Then the totality of that should be captured, no?
Sure. So, the other big announcement that happened on the sidelines of the G20 was this corridor between India, the Middle East, going all the way to Western Europe. Many are saying this is in response to China's Belt and Road. I know you will say that it stands on its own merit, but we have not seen, at least in scale, something to match what China has been doing for the last 10 years with One Belt, One Road. So, to that extent, to the scale extent at least, is this something that matches up to it?
Look, I think the moment you get into comparisons, you are going down a fundamentally wrong road. Okay? What is this about? This is about you have a very important economic center, historically, in human history, which today is once again regaining its place. It's the 5th largest economy, it's going to get bigger. You have another big historical economic center, Europe. And then you have countries between them, which again traditionally have played a very important role in ensuring commerce, not only between these two poles, if you would, but also between these countries in the middle and them. So, yesterday evening we had a dinner for the Saudi delegation because the Crown Prince was here. And one of the Saudis actually were telling me, they said, look, we have parts of Saudi Arabia where for generations there are pathways and there are routes. Everybody knows historically these were the routes which went to and from India. He said these are places where actually people enjoyed a high standard of living. They actually had a way of living which was related to the trafficking, to the goods movement, which was going there. Now, similarly with UAE, you know how deeply the maritime tradition, the dhows coming, the monsoon trade, etc. So we have now a certain favorable geopolitical situation where Saudi Arabia would like to step forward and facilitate a certain seamless logistical movement. You have UAE wishing to do the same. You have an India which is focused very much on Europe, a Europe which is very much focused on India. So what would you do if you are a smart strategist? You would put it all together. And so I would say, in a way, it's very much an evolution. On the one hand, a greater awareness in India and Europe about the merits of dealing with each other economically, but also greater awareness on both India and Europe's part of the importance of the region, especially the Gulf and the Arabian Peninsula here, and of the countries themselves. So this is a big deal, because it, you know, the question of how to create seamless economic flows, logistical flows, is one of the big issues in world history. So the return to history, you would say.
It's going back to
and
history.
that return to history predates any belt or any road which any country may have had.
Okay. No, one of the concerns about this Belt and Road that we were both referring to has been about the debt sustainability. We've seen countries, smaller countries that are not able to afford and going financially broke, even closer home countries like Sri Lanka. This corridor, how may it be more sustainable? How is it envisaged to be more sustainable?
Well, just look at the players here. Okay, you are talking India, Saudi, UAE, Europe, and America, and you are even thinking debt sustainability. Okay. I mean, these are countries with deep pockets. These are countries with a strong market. You know, they have the ability to evaluate projects and to say, yes, this will work, and that will not work. So I look again. You know, I'm not making a political point when I say don't compare. I genuinely believe that this one is different. This is a set of today contemporary leaderships, very aware of the opportunities before them, taking what has been a time-tested historical concept and then trying to see if we can give it a modern incarnation, and that is why I think it's very important.
You did mention about the Green Climate Fund. It was announced many years ago in Paris. It was a $100 billion fund. Not much of that money has gone to developing countries, and now in this Delhi edition of the G20, there's been an announcement of a new Green Climate Action Plan. Where is the nub of the problem? Is it that the developed world just doesn't want to cough up the money, or is it that mechanism was not working, we're trying something new now?
No, it's, you know, it's not just climate action, though obviously I mean, if you look at 2023 versus, let us say, 2015, 2016, no question in the last 6-7 years, climate worries, climate anxieties have grown.
True.
Okay. Each one of us have experienced in our lives. I mean, our lives are hotter, wetter, colder, drier, all at the same time, and that's a bad sign.
Yeah.
Okay. I think there's a larger issue. There's a climate action issue. There's also a sustainable development goals issue, which is 3 years of COVID, 1 year of the Ukraine conflict. Where are the resources today to keep the progress? So there are a large number of countries. This was the core message coming out, you know, when we did this Voice of Global South exercise. The core the distillation of what we gathered was really saying, look, we are on the ropes. I mean, we are cutting our nutrition, we are cutting our health, we are cutting our roads, we are cutting our education. So, I mean, for God's sake, find us some place where today we get some comfort, some easing up of the financial pressure on us. What therefore we are hoping is that the G20 Summit and what follows thereafter would find ways by which there would be more resources available for green, for development, and for green development. So, and that resources is both the current institutions having more resources, the individual countries putting in more resources, but also leveraging that resources to get more resources.
So one of the things that's been mentioned in the joint declaration, PM has also been mentioning this time and time again about how India is hoping to be the voice of the global South. In a deeply divided world where you have the West, America and its partners, and you have, you know, Russia and China on the other side, and also because of the role that emerging countries like Brazil and Indonesia and other emerging, South Africa, etc., played, in finding the consensus joint statement. Do you believe that countries of the South can be the bridge between these, what many are calling great power competition?
Perhaps, but I think the countries of South have their own concerns. And part of really what we saw last year, and which we did not want to have a repeat of this year, was that the deep concerns of the countries of the South would be buried under the pressure of the East-West friction. So yes, I would say, I mean, if you ask the bulk of the countries of the South, most of them would say, you know, we are deeply anxious about this conflict. We really don't want to see this continue. We would like to find a way of ending it, because we don't think it's good for the parties involved, but we don't think it's good for any of us. That it is adding to the stresses in the global fractures which are already there. So at this moment, I think it's more realistic to focus on the global South's own concerns. But that having been said, I've seen every time there's any discussion about you know, what can we do to deal with the Ukraine conflict. You know, I've seen the Africans sought to take an initiative. Brazil tried to do something. So countries will want to do it, because it's also their way of expressing their position. Now, who knows at what point you know, suddenly it may click. You know. But where we are concerned, you know, for us, I would say the key issue in this summit was that you take a full global perspective. You do not, you know, prioritize one set of problems at the expense of other set of problems. That you recognize the totality of challenges, and especially we focus on what has been a source of great anxiety for the global South. And I think in that shining that spotlight on the predicament of the global South, we have been quite successful.
Before the summit began, when the Chinese president decided not to attend the Delhi G20, it was seen as a snub to India. But do you believe, with what has been achieved in the last 2 days, over Saturday and Sunday over the Delhi G20 Summit, not just India but other countries in the G20 have shown to China that if China does not want to be part of that room at the highest level, then it's China's loss, it's not the rest of the world's loss?
Look, again, it's honestly not for us to say who will go at what level to which meeting. That's a national choice. It's a national choice, and we must respect that. In terms of what happened in Delhi, I would say, look, China was an important player, and finally at the crucial moment, China was contributive to what was overall consensus. So it was not that therefore they were not part of the conversation. They were very much in the conversations. They were very much in the negotiations. So I mean, the G20 at the end of the day was 20. Every one of them, you know, played their part, their full part in that. So you know, beyond that, you know, what call any country takes about the level, I think that's for them to weigh the merits of it.
No, because as a big advocate of multilateralism, going forward, do you see sort of competing multilateralisms? There are institutions like the G20, World Bank, IMF, etc., which one set of countries will be gung-ho about, and there are groupings like the BRICS and the SCO where China may want to take the lead on. Do you see sort of competing multilateralisms happening?
Well, I would one say that from our G20 summit, this G20 summit, the New Delhi G20 summit, first of all, it's good for multilateralism.
It is.
It's good for multilateralism because the sense over the last many years has been, you know, it's impossible to get everybody in the room to agree. Okay, there's been actually a cynicism almost verging on, you know, nobody even tries hard as a result. Okay, I think we reversed that. You know, one for me, one very powerful takeaway was people leaving Delhi, the other 19 delegations, would leave with that sense that, look guys, we actually got a common landing point. Yes, nobody would have said we got 100% of what we wanted, but that's always the case with a multilateral outcome. But that we got a landing point, that we were able to agree on core issues, and we did not allow differences, because there are differences. I mean, let's not pretend that there are none. That even though there are very deep differences on some issues, we had the wisdom and the foresight to come together on the issues on which we would agree. But the other part which you mentioned about BRICS, I want you to really reflect on what you yourself said. Please don't think that BRICS is something which is led by one member of the BRICS. BRICS has 5 members.
Sure.
Let me tell you, each of the 5 weighs in forcefully, actively, productively on what happens in the BRICS. We've just come out of a BRICS summit. I mean, there is a sort of a Western narrative which would ascribe to BRICS a certain kind of national ownership. I think it does a disservice to all the rest of us. So, this may be a kind of a polemic between China and the West, but I don't think it's a true picture, and I don't think, frankly, it's very helpful to actually understand what is happening in the BRICS either.
I do want to talk to you about one issue that cropped up again on the sidelines, one of the bilaterals that happened. The Prime Minister putting out a very strong statement to Canada on this issue of Khalistan business, the support and the safe haven that Canada or sections within Canada seem to have become. But the Canadian Prime Minister in his press conference sort of seemed to characterize this as a freedom of expression / foreign interference issue. How would you respond to that characterization?
No, I don't think there's anything for me to respond to. The Canadian Prime Minister and his system said what they had to say. I think our system said what it had to say. The particular issue, which is the space which has been given to the Khalistanis in Canada, I think is a worrisome issue. I think we have, this is one occasion, it's not a new conversation.
True.
This is part of an ongoing conversation. So I think that's really what there is to it. I would leave it at that.
Have you lent one of your aircrafts to him? I believe he had some trouble.
No, I think finally his aircraft got repaired and.
Okay. All right. So finally, Dr. Jaishankar, I mean, I said this at the top. I mean, you and your team have been working round the clock for the last year since we got the presidency, and you finally made it happen. This is a huge success. Do you feel like Sachin Tendulkar after scoring 100 hundreds? I mean, what next for you personally?
No, look, I would say when we look, when we reflect on this G20 summit, no question, it's a very important diplomatic achievement. I'm sure someday, maybe 5 years, 10 years, somebody writing on Indian foreign policy and says, okay, this was the rise of India, they would certainly say, okay, this was an important milestone. It was an important milestone for a variety of reasons. One, it showed an Indian ability really to forge a consensus. Now, why did that happen? I'm sure, everybody worked hard. That's one part of it. But it happened because for each of those 19 countries, the relationship with India was also important. So one was the merits of the issue, but no question for them, the fact that the presidency was in India, that India was the host, was also very much a factor. You could see that. It was an opportunity for us also in many ways to, demonstrate both our, I would say contemporary face, the technology face. One of the interesting things I must tell you is a lot of people went, we had this place for cashless payments.
Yeah, correct.
And that was a big hit because, many people really, this is interesting. Much of the G20 had never done anything like this in their own country. Or, a lot of the lounge conversation was really about Chandrayaan and the the fact that we chose to do a really challenging location for the landing, etc. So they certainly left with a strong sense of the change in India over the last decade. But they also left with a sense that, look, here is a country proud of its civilization, very, very confident of its culture, today putting that forward. So for me, this G20 summit will be a milestone in the rise of India, that people will look back and say, look, these were steps by which India's influence, India's stature, India's image in the world really expanded. And I think that is the way it should be. And here I must say, it's not an empty phrase. We always said it was a national endeavor. Yeah. I would say that in every way, whether it was in its coverage, whether it was in its participation, which was in the showcasing, in every way it was a national endeavor.
All right. Many congratulations once again, and thank you very much for speaking with us here on CNN News.
Thank you, Zakka.
All right, that was External Affairs Minister Dr. Jaishankar, one of the chief architects of the G20 Delhi Summit and the success therein. Let me now try and dissect that interview. I have two very special guests who are joining us. Kanwal Sibal was a long-time colleague of Dr. Jaishankar in the Foreign Service, former Foreign Secretary, and I'm also joined by Victor Gao, the chair at the Soochow University. Kanwal Sibal, let me start with you first. Of course, everybody's analyzed the whole joint statement, particularly on the Russia-Ukraine war. The justification or the defense from the External Affairs Minister, you heard him, basically saying or are addressing these concerns about dilution of language, not mentioning Russia directly, is two things. One, that look, every declaration is new and it has to reflect the current circumstances. So the Delhi declaration can't just copy paste the lines from the Bali declaration when it comes to the Russia-Ukraine war, because the situation of the war itself has changed, number one. And number two, he's also, without naming those countries, has said that, you can't, on the one hand, say that this thing has affected all of us. It's one of the most important things, but I will not capture it in the joint statement. So I think he's addressing both sides, both concerns in the West about dilution of the language, including Ukraine, and concerns with Russia and China, saying, how can it not be captured? You have to have that in the joint statement. And they had 7 paragraphs of it in the joint statement.
Well, I think the External Affairs Minister has quite rightly pointed out the dynamism behind this compromised language on Ukraine. But the fact of the matter is that Russia had made it very clear that it would no longer accept the language that was included in the Bali Declaration. And China has been supportive of that position. The West all along, till the last minute, made it very clear that unless Russia is condemned and the language that they want is not included in the joint declaration, they will not allow a joint document to emerge. So it was a standoff. I think what then worked in favor of a compromise were a few things. One was, quite rightly, the host was India. The host was the Prime Minister of India. And I think there was a desire not to make this G20 under our presidency a failure. Because it would have amounted to a failure if no joint declaration had been issued. And it would have affected, certainly in some ways, the dynamism of our ties with the West. And I think if President Biden was present on the spot, and they are the driving force behind this.
Yeah.
And if he stood firm that he will not budge unless he got the language he wanted, actually it meant really that he's not terribly concerned about how it might affect India's position, India's prestige, Prime Minister's personal prestige, as well as the impact on Indo-US relations. I think, therefore, he attached more importance to keeping India on the right side of the United States and the G7 at the cost of making some concessions on the Ukraine language. That is one. The Russians have also compromised in the sense that while Russia has not been mentioned by name at all, but there are indirect allusions to Russia. The many principles that have been put there, which the West can interpret as being directed against Russia. In fact, the Western line, as that of Jake Sullivan and President Macron, is that the West actually got what it wanted because it put into the text all that they wanted in terms of countries not violating the UN Charter or acquiring territories by force, and etc., etc. And the Russians went along so long as they were not targeted directly by name. That is second. Third, which is very important, I think, is that the West, the G7, wants the G20 to survive. They see that alternative platforms are emerging on the international scene, especially with the recent expansion of BRICS. And with a whole host of countries which are waiting in the line to join BRICS, and no Western country is present in the BRICS. And therefore, you have an alternative platform where the agenda is not dictated by the West, which doesn't have the priorities of the West.
Okay. We'll try and fix that audio with Secretary Sibal in just a moment. But let me get Professor Victor Gao into this. I asked the Foreign Minister also about the decision by the Chinese President not to attend, which at that time was seen as a bit of a snub. But given what has been achieved over the 2 days that Delhi hosted this G20 summit and some really big deals, not just the joint statement, overcoming very serious differences on the Russia-Ukraine war, but also this big announcement of the corridor from India, the Middle East, going all the way to Western Europe, the Biofuel Alliance, adding the African Union, India walking the African Union chair to take his place at the G20 high table. These are all very, very big decisions that have been taken in that room where Xi Jinping chose not to be part of that room. So the signaling is from the entire G20, all the other 19 powers, is that if China does not want to be part of the room, if Xi Jinping does not want to be part of the room, that's his loss. The world is going to go ahead and make some of these pretty big deals.
Thank you very much for having me. First of all, please allow me to congratulate once again on the successful G20 summit in New Delhi. And personally, I would like to thank and congratulate the Indian government and Prime Minister Modi, the Foreign Minister, and all the Indian friends for pulling this off. It's a wonderful summit and it deserves full recognition from all the countries involved. The third point is that China attaches great importance to G20 as well as the summit meeting in G20. China sent its premier, who is a member of the Standing Committee of the Politburo, very, very important person, and mandated to take care of the economic affairs of China. And G20, unlike, let's say, the Security Council of the United Nations, does not have a mandate to focus on geopolitical issues. Its original mandate is to focus on economic and financial matters. And this falls squarely into the responsibility of the premier in China. Therefore, by sending the premier of China to attend the G20 summit in New Delhi, it doesn't constitute a stop. It constitutes a full recognition of the importance of G20 and how these important issues need to be dealt with. China opposes diversion of G20 into other issues, of course.
How does one explain then that for every G20 since Xi Jinping became president of China since 2013, he was the one who went? It was not the premier. This was the first time that he didn't come for a G20. It was the premier who went. How do you explain that?
Well, Mr. Li Qiang became the new premier in March 2023. He is very new in his job, and he has the full trust and confidence of General Secretary and President Xi Jinping. They get along very well as a pair, leading the country, leading the party, and leading the government. Therefore, I think it's very logical from the Chinese perspective. It's very logical, very natural for the Chinese premier to attend the New Delhi summit. It's not a snub. It's not less of a recognition. It is still a full recognition because what matters eventually is the substance. The substance is that China attaches great importance to a great neighboring country like India.
Okay.
China attaches great importance to the
Let me
New Delhi
bring
summit.
back Secretary Sibal back into this conversation. The other big thing, and people, are not quite maybe they understand the magnitude of it, but the impact it will have, this economic corridor between India, the Middle East, and all the way to Europe, backed by the United States. And I asked External Affairs Minister Jaishankar this, is this a reply or a match to the BRI? And he said it stands on its own. He doesn't believe in comparing projects such as these. And I also asked him about the financing, because China has run into trouble when it comes to sustainability of its projects. Many smaller countries have found it difficult to service the debt that was incurred because of these massive infrastructure projects and have been worse off for it. And the answer to that, again, was look at the countries involved: Saudi Arabia, UAE, France, Germany, Italy, India, the United States. The question of debt serviceability or the lack of ability to service debt does not arise, because these are some of the biggest countries in the world economically. Does that convince you, Kawal Sibal, that this is going to be more, not just more sustainable, but going to give the signal to smaller countries that this is a more sustainable way of developing infrastructure than the Belt and Road?
Well, I'd like to say a couple of things. One, that we should not look upon the connectivity projects that we are involved in as some kind of rival projects to the BRI. After all, the international North-South corridor through Iran to Russia predates the BRI by about 10 years. And this particular project actually is being developed because of the very intensive ties India has developed with the Gulf monarchies, with the UAE and the Saudi Arabia in particular, these two countries in particular. These two countries have very major programs of development by 2030. If you look at the vision document of 2030, you will see how much investment they're going to make in new cities, in infrastructure. In fact, Saudi Arabia wants to develop the new Naim or someplace they're developing as some kind of a rival to Singapore. Mm-hmm. Now, in addition to that, there is the whole issue of food security, where we've been discussing with these countries how a food corridor can be created between India and these countries. Defense ties between India and these countries, because of concerns about security in the Indian Ocean and the West, and the Arabian Sea touches both India's coast and these countries. That defense element also is becoming important, and they want to invest in India's defense manufacturing as part of Atmanirbharta in order to reduce their dependence on the West, if you like.
Okay.
So these are the motivating factors. Now, on top of that, you have the ITU2 with Israel becoming partner, and the UAE and Israel normalizing relationship. So the Israeli element is an addition. So when you talk about Europe, it means that the corridor will go through Middle East, on to Jordan, Haifa, and then on to Europe. I think the connectivity in this region serves India's needs, serves the needs of these countries. Mm-hmm. And so far as Europe is concerned, I don't think it has that much stake in this project, frankly. But it will benefit because of India as a rising economy, India becoming more active, FTAs being signed with the European Union. Therefore, trade, investment, and all these things will benefit from this corridor. So it meets the interests of everybody, all sides. And the United States may certainly have in mind that this is a kind of a competitive project to the BRI. It gives an alternative route to India and these countries in the Middle East, which have very good relations and very close relations with China, to also have trade corridors which go into Europe. Okay,
so let me give the final word to Professor Gao. Again, no one wants to compare one to the other, but I think the comparisons are quite obvious. And two, the Belt and Road is Xi Jinping's signature initiative. Over 100 countries are part of it. But a large number of countries in Asia, in Africa, are simply being buried under the weight of the debt incurred because of some of these massive infrastructure projects. I mean, in the case of Sri Lanka, the case of Namibia. When those countries, those smaller countries, look at this big corridor and the big countries that are backing this, from the US, Saudi Arabia, UAE, India, when they see the big countries that are backing this project, isn't the signal that's going out to them that, look, maybe it's better to invest our time and energy and resources here, because at least it's backed by some of the biggest countries, not just by China, and we won't get crushed under the weight of Chinese debt?
First of all, talking about the corridor, I personally congratulate the launch of this corridor, and I hope it will be a success and assume it is a connectivity project. Then the more the better, because the more roads you build, the more connectivity projects you build, and they interact with each other, they reinforce each other. So by the end of the day, if BRI projects and corridor projects interact, hopefully they will reinforce each other. Secondly, I do hope India will beef up its own internal domestic connectivity projects at the same time, because otherwise it's unthinkable that you can participate in building a very brand new railway connectivity projects for other countries where you still need to do a lot of homework at home. Now, for the United States, the last time they built the railways, it was at the end of the 19th century. So how much they can contribute is very doubtful. Now, the other thing is that I would urge India and Pakistan to improve their relations, because you cannot get across from Pakistan to get further west onto the other parts according to the plan of this corridor. Now, talking about BRI, more than 100 countries participate. If you look at Indonesia, they just celebrated the successful launch of the Bandung-Jakarta high-speed railway. If you go to Laos, that high-speed railway is operating to the satisfaction of everyone. If you go to Ethiopia, they have brand new highways, etc., reaching the coast. And then you talk about Saudi Arabia, which is the biggest supplier of crude oil to China. The only high-speed railway which runs in Saudi Arabia was done by the Chinese companies, and I think it creates a lot of miracles.
I just want to add,
so when we talk about
30 seconds to the Pakistan point. I'm completely out of time. Sorry, I'm interrupting, but it's a curtailed debate today. Just on the Pakistan point, the reason why India is having to build all these connectivity projects, whether it's North-South or now this one, is because Pakistan doesn't give you overland rights. They have that sort of control. They don't give you overland rights. That's why India, 20 years ago, thought of the North-South corridor project. And reality is that hasn't taken off because of geopolitical reasons, perhaps even execution reasons. That's why they're looking at this project, this economic corridor, as a viable alternative. Thank you very much to both our guests. We're going to leave it at that. But as we move into the break, we're playing out some of the excerpts of the Jaishankar interview. Like I said, it's one of his first interviews right after the success of the Delhi G20 Summit. And I've asked him everything from how the joint declaration was brought about, which the countries that played a role in it, this corridor project, and of course, the whole question of China and what sort of signaling it sends to China that all of these big deals have been achieved despite its president not attending. Thank you for tuning in. All the focus, of course, has been on the joint declaration, and 12 hours before the declaration was officially adopted, negotiators were still not sure whether they would arrive at it. So give us, what was the inside story? How did it actually come through?
Well, I don't know about 12 hours. I can tell you it was much closer than that.
Much closer than 12 hours.
I mean, let me roll back here a bit. It was not that we thought a declaration wouldn't come out.
Okay.
But because I think, somewhere all of us, certainly, the team we had, Sherpa, myself, and I kept PM apprised from time to time what was happening. We had a sense eventually that we'll get there.
Okay.
But having said that, you have to get there.
Yes.
And what would happen is, it's like, we have it nailed down, and then something else would happen, and then we'd say, no, somebody is bracketed. So it was never done till it's done, and that kept coming closer and closer and closer. So much so that even in the forenoon of that day,
on Saturday morning,
9th September, while session 1 was going on, we still had some issues to be nailed down. This was obviously, you could say at one level, a source of concern or tension or whatever it is. But again, for those of us who've done a lot of these things before, this is how big international events go.
The other big announcement that happened on the sidelines of the G20 was this corridor between India, the Middle East, going all the way to Western Europe. Many are saying this is in response to China's Belt and Road. I know you will say that it stands on its own merit, but we have not seen, at least in scale, something to match what China has been doing for the last 10 years with One Belt, One Road. So to that extent, to the scale extent at least, is this something that matches up to it?
Look, I think the moment you get into comparisons, you are going down a fundamentally wrong road. Okay? What is this about? This is about you have a very important economic center historically in human history, which today is once again regaining its place. It's the 5th largest economy. It's going to get bigger. You have another big historical economic center, Europe, and then you have countries between them which again traditionally have played a very important role in ensuring commerce, not only between these two poles, if you would, but also between these countries in the middle and them. Now, similarly with UAE, you know how deeply the maritime tradition, the dhows coming, the monsoon trade, etc. So we have now a certain favorable geopolitical situation where Saudi Arabia would like to step forward and facilitate a certain seamless logistical movement. You have UAE wishing to do the same. You have an India which is focused very much on Europe, a Europe which is very much focused on India. So what would you do if you are a smart strategist? You would put it all together. And so I would say, in a way, it's very much an evolution. On the one hand, a greater awareness in India and Europe about the merits of dealing with each other economically, but also greater awareness on both India and Europe's part of the importance of the region, especially the Gulf and the Arabian Peninsula here, and of the countries themselves.
I do want to talk to you about one issue that cropped up again on the sidelines, one of the bilaterals that happened. The Prime Minister putting out a very strong statement to Canada on this issue of Khalistan business, the support and the safe haven that Canada or sections within Canada seem to have become. But the Canadian Prime Minister in his press conference sort of seemed to characterize this as a freedom of expression / foreign interference issue. How would you respond to that characterization?
No, I don't think there's anything for me to respond to. The Canadian Prime Minister and his system said what they had to say. I think our system said what it had to say. The particular issue, which is the space which has been given to the Khalistanis in Canada, I think is a worrisome issue. I think we have, this is one occasion, it's not a new conversation.
True.
This is part of an ongoing conversation. So I think that's really what there is to it. I would leave it at that.
You did mention about the Green Climate Fund. It was announced many years ago in Paris. It was a $100 billion fund. Not much of that money has gone to developing countries, and now in this Delhi edition of the G20 there's been an announcement of a new Green Climate Action Plan. Where is the nub of the problem? Is it that the developed world just doesn't want to cough up the money, or is it that that mechanism was not working, we're trying something new now?
No, it's not just climate action, though obviously if you look at 2023 versus let us say 2015, 2016, no question in the last 6-7 years, climate worries, climate anxieties have grown.
True.
Okay. Each one of us have experienced in our lives. Our lives are hotter, wetter, colder, drier, all at the same time, and that's a bad sign.
Yeah.
Okay. I think there's a larger issue. There's a climate action issue. There's also a sustainable development goals issue, which is 3 years of COVID, 1 year of the Ukraine conflict. Where are the resources today to keep the progress? So there are a large number of countries. This was the core message coming out, when we did this Voice of Global South exercise. The core the distillation of what we gathered was really saying, look, we are on the ropes. I mean, we are cutting our nutrition, we are cutting our health, we are cutting our roads, we are cutting our education. So, I mean, for God's sake, find us some place where today we get some comfort, some easing up of the financial pressure on us. What therefore we are hoping is that the G20 Summit and what follows thereafter would find ways by which there would be more resources available for green, for development and for green development. So, and that resources is both the current institutions having more resources, the individual countries putting in more resources, but also leveraging that resources to get more resources.
So now what's under question is the inflated cost of this particular proposed precast toilets that are being built. Now, as I mentioned, under phase 2, 46 new precast toilets are going to be built and the total cost will be around 281 crores, which is equal to that of a luxury apartment. Now, each toilet will cost around 4 to 5 crores. Now, the question is why the inflated cost? Remember, at the very same time, you have the Bengaluru developmental minister who is saying that there are no sufficient funds for new developmental works. When such is the financial state, why the inflated cost for such precast toilets, high-end precast toilets that are being proposed and built? And are these toilets worth it is the question that is being raised. And at the very same time, the second reason, the main reason why such project is undertaken as claimed by the BBMP is that these can be built at a short span of time. Now, if you take a look at the phase 1 that was being built, around only 10 toilets, precast toilets were constructed out of the 25 proposed toilets, and it took around 2 years for them. It was started in the March 2021 and is not yet complete. And now they have proposed 46 new precast toilets. If it doesn't complete this particular 46 new toilets in the stipulated time, once again the question is being raised. The main reason why the short span time, the main reason why it was chosen is not being fulfilled yet. So what's the need for such precast toilets is the question that is being raised by the citizens of Bengaluru. What is seen as a high-end luxury project undertaken by the BBMP, the Bengaluru Civic Agency is constructing around 46 precast high-end toilets across the IT city with a opening cost of 281 crore, with each precast toilet costing around 4 to 5 crores. Now, behind me is one such precast toilet that was proposed and built by the BBMP under phase 1. So, it comprises of various features such as providing dry and clean toilets, sensor-based flushing, solar-powered lights, and also ample ventilation. So, these are the features that make up this high-end precast toilets proposed and built by the BBMP under phase 1. Right now, the BBMP has proposed to construct 46 such new toilets, new precast toilets, which cost around 281 crore. So let's go inside and check what are the features of these high-end precast toilets that cost around that makes each toilet cost around 6 crores, around 4 to 5 to 6 crores. So it comprises of a sensor-based flushing. So you have the sensor here. So usually the other BBMP toilets have a push button water feature. Now this has a sensor based flushing, so that's one of the feature. And the phase 2 of this particular high-end precast toilet comprises of water saving taps, but this is built under phase 1 and it's not in a good condition, not maintained in a good condition. The BBMP says that in the second phase, the high-end precast toilets comprise of water-saving tap fixtures, and this is a particular precast toilet is also said to be solar-powered. You have the solar-powered lights that are fixated there, and what the BBMP claims is also that it provides ample amount of ventilation. It doesn't look like it has a ample amount of ventilation here, except the fact that there are just 2 to 3 glass windows that have been placed here. So these are the features. Now this particular precast toilet is being built under the phase 1. In phase 2 now the BBMP is proposing to build around 46 toilets which cost around 281 crores, so that which I mentioned earlier. So now what's under question is the inflated cost of these particular proposed precast toilets that are being built. Now, as I mentioned, under phase 2, 46 new precast toilets are going to be built, and the total cost will be around 281 crores, which is equal to that of a luxury apartment. Now, each toilet will cost around 4 to 5 crores. Now, the question is, why the inflated cost? Remember, at the very same time, you have the Bengaluru developmental minister who is saying that there are no sufficient funds for new developmental works. When such is the financial state, why the inflated cost for such precast toilets, high-end precast toilets that are being proposed and built? And are these toilets worth it, is the question that is being raised. And at the very same time, the second reason, the main reason why such project is undertaken as claimed by the BBMP is that these can be built at a short span of time. Now, if you take a look at the phase 1 that was being built, around only 10 toilets, precast toilets were constructed out of the 25 proposed toilets, and it took around 2 years for them. It was started in the March 2021 and is not yet complete. And now they have proposed 46 new precast toilets. If it doesn't complete this particular 46 new toilets in the stipulated time, once again the question is being raised. The main reason why the short span time
Hello, Namaskar. This is First Post and you're watching Vantage with me, Palki Sharma. After a week of diplomacy and interactions with G20